Welcome, and thank you for joining us on our guided tour through the history of film and cinema. From its early days, the sideshow parlor trick, the very first mass public screenings, from the very first use of the cut and edits, to the first appearances of sound and color on film, we shall be exploring the history and evolution of early film technology and techniques. Today, we should be answering the questions of how film was invented, who invented film and the techniques that were used to create films, and how did film evolve during those early days. The simulation of motion dates back centuries, perhaps even millennium, before the invention of film and cameras. From here, we will begin with the early development of
The simulation of motion does go back a very long time. Some historians actually believe that prehistoric humans used torchlight to make cave paintings seem to move and come to life. A more recent example of simulated motion would be the zoetrope, crudely drawn here. The zoetrope operated by having a sort of drum-like cylinder. On the inside of the cylinder were several sequential images, and directly above them were a series of mirrors going all around the inside. And then all around the outside were slits cut into the cylinder. A person would look in to the slits as the drum spun around really quickly. And so as the drum spun around, the images would seem to blend together, creating a simulation of motion. Another precursor to the simulation of motion would be the thaumatrope. Two images drawn on either side of a circle of paper. When you spin them around, the images seem to blend together. This isn't really a simulation of motion, but it is a precursor. For a long time, simulated motion was little more than a sideshow magic trick, an illusion to make people go ooh and ah. Didn't really have any practical application. That is, until in 1877, Maybridge rigged 12 fast exposure cameras to photograph a horse galloping to help the then governor of California win a bet. After the images came in, they saw that there were images that showed the horse with all hooves off the ground. The governor won his bet, but he had spent a lot of money to prove it. Maybridge continued photographing and projecting motion, and eventually approached Edison about combining motion picture with Edison's newly invented phonographs. Edison turned him down, but the idea stuck with him. Soon, Edison began investigating the ideas of simulated motion. Edison put the man William Kennedy Laurie Dixon in charge of the project, and in 1893, he had patented his own motion picture camera and projector, the kinetograph and the kinetoscope. The kinetograph used perforated rolls of celluloid film to capture motion and was very large and cumbersome. It relied on electrical power, which meant that you had to be plugged in order to use it. The kinetoscope looked like a large cabinet. Inside the cabinet was a reel of film. The film was projected through a small eyepiece on the top. A person could look through and see a fun film. These films were only really of people, say, flexing, band dancers dancing, or boxers boxing. There was no real story or narrative to them back then. The kinetoscope was basically a peep show device that allowed only a single person to see a film at a time. Edison's inventions had two important shortcomings. For one, his films could not be projected to large groups at a time. Edison had given up the idea of projecting for large groups of people, and instead decided to focus on his single-viewer kinetoscopes. But he had also failed to apply for a patent overseas. This allowed two brothers and a professional stage illusionist to begin their own experimentations with film and motion capture. Lumiere brothers Auguste Marie, Louis Nicolas, and Louis Jean began experimenting with Edison's designs in the mid-1890s.
Auguste and Louis Lumiere's father, Antoine Lumiere, was invited to a showing of Thomas Edison's kinetoscope.
When their father, who owned a photography company, had seen a demonstration of the kinetoscope, He had gone back to his sons and convinced them to create their own version of the kinetoscope and the kinetograph, saying that they could do better than Edison.
He then inspired the Lumiere brothers to create the cinematograph, which was a combination of a camera, a printer, and a projector.
Within a year, they had created their cinematograph. It was portable and operated manually rather than electrically. But more impressively, it could not only record motion, but it could also print the film and project it. By 1895, they had held their first public film screening. Their first film, Leaving the Factory, displayed workers leaving their father's factory.
They released the cinematograph along with 9 films to paying audiences.
The Lumieres were not the first to develop a portable camera, nor hold public screenings, but their techniques were much more efficient and practical than ones that had come before them.
Now that they had the means to capture motion on film, filmmakers were struck with the query of what to depict on film. This next segment will lead us on to the advent of
The first narrative film was The Sprinkler Sprinkled, which was about a gardener watering his plants and a boy who plays a prank on him. Another popular film released was Workers Leaving the Lumiere Factory, which was about workers exiting the factory.
The Lumieres' films were slightly longer than previous films, including Edison, and could be seen by more than one person at a time. But their films were still limited to less than a minute, and there was no real story to them. Most of their films only consisted of one scene and one shot.
One of the films released was the arrival of a train to La Ciotat, which caused all the audiences to run out because they thought the train was coming at them.
When the Lumieres began projecting films, they caught the eye of master stage illusionist Georges Méliès. He immediately tried to buy a cinematograph from the Lumieres, but they turned him down. And so, he started work building his own cinematograph. By 1895, he was shooting his own films.
Georges Méliès is the father of sci-fi genre, and perfect examples of these are Le Voyage dans le Monde and Lune à un Matre. He sparked the horror film genre as well.
While Méliès was first discovering the joys of filming, Alice Guy was working as a secretary for a camera company that produced films to demonstrate their products. She took a look at the films they were producing and decided that she could do better. Let's learn more about Alice Guy.
Actually, it was Alice Guy, and she was the first female director and known to be the first director to film a narrative story, helping shape the film industry from the start. When Alice was 21 years old, she attended a 60mm motion picture by the Lumiere brothers. After the screening, she was inspired to create her own film, so she wrote, produced, and directed her first film called The Cabbage Fairy. This short film was about a fairy delivering babies grown out of cabbages.
Alice Guy had become the first director to depict fictional narrative on film.
After the film, she went on and produced around 600 films from 1 minute to 30 minutes.
Before film editing, people were afraid that film editing would confuse audiences, despite the fact that it had already been used in many different novels and live-action theater. First example of film editing was
Georges Méliès. He is the pioneer of special effects. He innovated the stop trick, the dissolve, and double exposure.
While filming on the street, Méliès's camera stopped working. Méliès fiddled with his camera and got it working again. But when he reviewed what he had filmed, he saw that the camera had stopped. The people all disappeared, only to be replaced by different people. Cars changed to buses. He had discovered the stop trick.
Stop trick, in which he used the camera to stop rolling while an object is replaced or removed in the frame. A perfect example would be The Vanishing Lady. Edwin S. Porter became director of production for Edison's film company. He is the pioneer of dramatic editing, and two great examples would be The Life of an American Fireman, created in 1903, and The Great Train Robbery, 1903 as well. The Life of an American Fireman was the first film to present a character's thoughts. He converted part of the movie screen into a mind screen, quote unquote. Griffith then revealed the logic of simply cutting to the character's mental vision. He integrated the close-up shot as well, and he also started to cut freely and slowly, which allowed more fluidity in the movies. Pioneered dramatic editing and discovered that a picture could tell a story in continuity form.
Among the earliest examples of film editing was cross-cutting, which was used in The Great Train Robbery. It was when two different scenes were filmed simultaneously at different locations.
The Great Train Robbery is the first to achieve continuity of action, in which he used elliptical jump in time, in which he cuts back and forth to the opening scene. This is the most effective way to shape a work and to omit the inessential. Life of an American Fireman also integrated the cross-cut version, in which he cuts back and forth from the interior and the exterior of the house. And he also used sequence of shots which could be built into a scene.
D.W. Griffith contributed a lot to the development of film, but he didn't actually create any of the techniques that he used. He did use many of those techniques to enhance the storytelling, though.
D.W. Griffith experimented with many camera placements. He used subjective camera placements in his film Broken Blossoms. In this film, an abusive father wants to hit his daughter and she hides in her closet. The camera is placed close to their faces to capture the father's anger and the daughter's fear, adding more intensity to the film. D.W. Griffith discovered that if he kept the camera on one side of the axis of action, the audience will not get confused when cutting from one scene to another. Another one of his inventions in editing was intercutting or cross-cutting, which was cutting between two parallel actions.
We have a lot of talk about the star system. It started in 1920 to 1930. The star system was like a method for acting, creating, and promoting and exploiting actors in Hollywood films. Movie studios would select from a scene young actors and glamorize them to create new personas, often inventing new names and even new backgrounds. So the star system put an emphasis on the new images rather than acting. Although discrete acting, voice, and dancing lessons were a common part of the regimen. Women were expected to behave as ladies and were never to be seen in public.
I think that that's actually pretty devastating to believe that they were treated in such harsh conditions. Straddling the contradiction between standardization and differentiation, it allowed film companies to reconcile the competing imperatives of economy and originality. One of the keys maintaining these actors and power system was the long-term option contract.
For example, these contracts were 7 years long. Imagine having actors chained to their work for 7 years to these movie studios.
Exactly, and in fact, under its aegis, they could pay high salaries to the privileged elite in Hollywood, while simultaneously controlling costs by placing strict limits on the earnings of the character actors, supporting players and extras who occupied the lower strata of the hierarchy.
Florence Lawrence, In 1910, she was best known as the first star. She was the first actress to get film credit. Back then, they didn't have credit in the movies. She influenced a lot of actors to work hard to get their credit for their acting. We also have Charlie Chaplin. He was a comedian. He was wearing like a circus clown, combining elegance and his facial expression and impeccable timing.
These were just a couple of the important actors in the time period, but they really did pave the way for the things that are going on today.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, right?
So the next topic we'll talk about acting methods.
D.W. Griffith also used overdramatic gestures and expressions since there was no sound to let the audience know what the actors were feeling.
So actors were standing in front of the mirror practicing to remember their scripts.
To get them to memorize.
Yes, it's really amazing how actors could remember a lot of scripts, right, from different movies.
Films were about more than editing and what stories were being told. They had to also look good, both the sets and the actors.
George Méliès created the first film studio. The earliest films needed a lot of sunlight in order to expose the film, to capture the image. And his solution in order to protect his sets from the environment was to create a greenhouse-like structure where all the walls and the ceilings were made of glass in order to get as much natural sunlight as possible into the room.
Kind of like this room over here.
This allowed the sets to be highly customizable, where you can just switch out certain set pieces in order to create a whole new scene. Méliès was able to create one of his most influential and popular films in his glass studio, A Trip to the Moon. Méliès was able to create an entirely new fantasy world thanks to his extremely detailed backdrops of the moon, very detailed costumes of wizard robes and the garb of the moon natives, and also huge props like spaceships.
A Trip to the Moon was the climax to all of Méliès' great techniques.
Soon other filmmakers around the world began to create these glass structures, often on top of roofs, in order to capture the most sunlight to film.
After the war, film began to grow and evolve even more. Filmmakers all over the world were experimenting with new techniques in editing, directing, cinematography, and even set design.
The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari also used production design as a way to create its disturbing atmosphere. The sharp angles of the set created this very distorted look of reality that set the tone for this psychological thriller. Another film to use production design to its advantage is Metropolis. The film used miniature sets in order to create a very complex futuristic world, full of angular buildings and architecture. Its Star Robot's costume was quite a feat as well, as it was created by making a full body cast of the actor.
Lev Kuleshov was among the first to dissect the effects of juxtaposition, which is putting two acts together in the instance of playing two elements like together side by side. In this instance, depending on how the camera is filming everything, the audience will feel a very specific emotion or feeling. And then around the late 1920s, the upright ovella was invented. This allowed editors to make very specific cuts and edits toward films that previously were extraordinarily difficult to manufacture. And then it was around this time that something like the montage was invented.
Montage, invented by Sergei Eisenstein, who transformed the principles of classical editing into something more intellectually contextualized for propaganda.
This was a way to put together a bunch of stuff all together in order to get some sort of moral or message towards the public. For example, in something like Charlie Chaplin's 1936 movie Modern Times, there was a shot of a herd of sheep coming together, and in the middle of that was a black sheep. This was then followed by a faceless, crowded group of men all on their way to work. And then right afterwards, we immediately cut back to Charlie Chaplin in the middle of the group, the black sheep in the herd.
It was after World War II the United States began to emerge as the major power in the film industry. Hollywood became the mecca for people wanting to break through in film.
In the US, mainly in New York and Los Angeles, many studios were built, and the development of artificial lighting allowed for more studio filming. A lot of films were created in this way. Filmmakers in Los Angeles filmed a lot on their studios, but also on location. The city is close to the desert, mountains, and ocean, allowing for a variety of landscapes to be used. Films shot on location were a favorite of film critics and public audiences alike.
Times were certainly beginning to change. The Cold War and the Red Scare saw the end of the studio system, and the rise of television became a serious competitor for film and theaters. In the following years, there would be a renaissance of art and vision in film and cinema. New names in directing and acting would arise and create films that would define cinema for years to come.
The last 20 years have seen an emphasis on non-linear editing, which is basically editing on editing software rather than the camera itself.
Everything that's been explained up until this point was something we also know as linear editing, or editing from the camera itself. We live in a day and age where editing can be a little bit more hands-on, where we can use more raw footage like this to get the basic ideas out.
There is so much film to experience. I hope this journey we've taken you on has given you a desire to take your own journey through the history of film and cinema. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a fantastic evening, day, or night. Bye.
Don't stop filming. Real quick, can you go over that? The words are, where was it? Standardization and reconcile.
Okay.
You pronounced it a bit weird.
Jeez.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Make sure.
I don't want to be mean. I just,
No, I get it.
Alright, do you want me to like clap or something?
No, because it's you don't have to.
Alright. Then okay, again. I'll
Popular and influential films in his class.
Hold on. Alright, so with the microphone on, this is testing. I did that thing that I do where I forget to turn the microphone on. But that was good practice, I think. So we're gonna have to run through that again. Yeah. It's a pity because it was some good behind the scenes stuff that go over here. So this is officially the last bit of filming because I need to get a good shot of cars going down the street for the accidental stop trick bit. So I'm gonna outside, take a bit of a walk for a bunch of cars to go down the street. I'm gonna go down to the intersection over there. So it should be fun. So I got it. Got what I needed. I hope no one objects to having their car in our video. I don't know how to blow out license plates. Yeah, you'll be able to see them. But I don't know, you could. Oh, hey, there's a cat. Nope, the cat's going. Oh, no, the cat's right. Can you see it? I can't tell. Yep, there's a cat, a little white cat. Is it good luck if a white cat crosses your path? Oh no, here she comes. Hello. I'm just making a video of about filming. This whole thing has just been so much fun. I just hope that people enjoy it, both people who were a part of it, you know, and the people who watch it during class, or if we upload it, you know, maybe we'll become internet famous. That would be a trip and a half.